All right, guys, we should be back. I saw I saw in the labs it was it's like 15 people in there, so that's good. That's awesome. You guys can have access to tutors, and they're there to help you out. So that's great. And if they're still in there, that's fine. They can continue working. But for those of you that are in this general channel, let's continue on with the lecture because there's a bit to do. So we already established the window object. We also mentioned the document. We already know about the DOM from the HTML that we did in Full Stack 1, and we kind of have an idea what the document is and all of that. So we need to just expand on that concept a little bit because now we're going to be able to access that tree programmatically, which at first may not seem too exciting, but when we get to I guess the next lesson, we can change things in the tree, which makes it really cool because you can actually modify the document without refreshing the page, which is pretty awesome. Which is why a lot of these JavaScript frameworks have taken off, like React and Angular, because they can modify the DOM tree and without having to refresh the whole page, which makes for some really interesting types of applications, modern applications, right? So it's kind of based on this stuff too, but you need to know how this works because we're going to be doing some of that. So refresher on the DOM, then we're going to look at that interface that we looked at the Windows interface. We might as well look at the document interface. Today we're just going to we're going to find the elements in that tree. We're going to select them and the various types of selectors. And when we talk about selectors, it kind of reminds us of CSS, cascading style sheets. So if you were good at selectors, then this should be a mechanism that you can select those same nodes, but then use them with JavaScript, right? So you can select, before with CSS, we would select a node and apply a style to it. We certainly could do that with JavaScript, but we can do more, right? We can select it and we can do more things. We could, for right now, we're just going to find them in the DOM, but eventually we can modify them. We can insert, we can delete, we can apply styles, we can apply events. We can, when we get done this week, we'll have more of an understanding of how to work with the interface using JavaScript. So the DOM, we should know it by now. If not, it's the document. So what is the DOM? It's the document object model. Nothing more than a block level diagram of all the HTML elements loaded in our page when the browser loads that web page. I tried to, really press this image in your head that when we did HTML, that it could be presented as a tree of objects with branches and sub branches and leaves, nodes, if you will, nodes, right? So yeah, that's how we represent it. The DOM, the document object model, allows us to add the interactivity to our pages. So we do have that HTML tree, but then we have that model overlaying it that allows us to add interactivity to the tree, right? So there's the HTML nodes, but then there is the model of those nodes that allow us to access those branches and leaves and add different things to them or modify them. Yes, and anyhow, the DOM itself, because of this, and like I mentioned before, the other frameworks that may be out there we may learn about, they follow this structure, but then they also add to it in different ways. But anyhow, let's cover this. Right. So again, we can visualize it in this way, where we have the document root that we know, HTML, and then we branch out on the left panel. On that left panel, we have that we break out the head. And if you remember what our HTML may look like, we may have a title inside of there. We may have some text in there as well. Maybe we have some script elements, some style elements inside of that branch, right? Inside of this other branch, maybe the body, and then it branches out to sub branches. So we may have an H1 element, and then we have its content, which might be some text. Further branch out to a paragraph. Inside the paragraph may have content. Now, as you know, this is a simple tree. Looking back at HTML, if we really mapped it out, you know, any one of these nodes could have a subtree, and nested tree within that, nesting very deeply, right? Very high level. This is a couple elements here. But the document enables JavaScript to access and manipulate these elements and styles of a website, of a page. So the model, though, the model of this tree structure of objects defines the HTML elements as objects. Because you gotta remember, there's the model of the tree, right? So you have the representation of the HTML, and then you have the model. So each HTML object is HTML element is an object. So you can also define the properties and events on those elements. So if you wanted to, as you get really good at JavaScript, if you wanted to, somewhere in this tree, find the paragraph and add some type of event to it, where like we had seen in our previous lab questions or example, where there's an on-click event. When we learn how to do this, we can select the paragraph and add an on-click event to it, which would mean if some user were scrolling down the page and you had you could even add styling to make it flash. So if you had a flashing text, you could also add an event. So if they hover their mouse over it, their cursor turns into the hand cursor, the pointer turns into a cursor. And if they click on it, we can add some interactivity to that. We could do something as simple as toggle an alert, or maybe something crazy like if they click it, it goes away. We basically remove that feature from the web page. We could do that because there's a whole bunch of methods on these HTML elements that we can use once we learn how to find them and select them. So if we want to interact with this DOM, this document object model, as the window is an API or an interface, so is the document object model. So API stands for Application Programming Interface, which has all those methods built onto them and properties, right? So when we learn this one particularly, so there's a lot to this one as well. This one can allow you to change and remove those HTML elements in the page. You can change and add styles to elements. If you wanted to add a style to something as simple as, changing anything you click to have a red background, to something like a loader, like the spinning loader page, that itself is just a div tag that's like hidden. And what happens is when some events happen, you show the loading tag. The loading tag may have an animation that never ends, but you can quickly hide and show that based on some logic, right? And then you can trigger it off an event, and then we get into all that, right? So you can read and change the element attributes, which are the source, which would mean maybe you could change a picture element. You could, when you hover across a picture, you can toggle it from faded to having color, all sorts of stuff. There's all sorts of cool stuff that you can really do with a page as you get better with this. Now we're dealing with the interface. You can, knowing with your foundation of JavaScript, you can actually make very dynamic pages when we get good at this stuff. So you can create new HTML elements and insert them into the DOM. So we can insert things, block sections, things like that. If you were working on a single page application like React or Angular, in fact, they do this quite a bit. When you are clicking around an application, a single page application, you may appear that you are navigating a site, but what's happening is different pieces of the DOM are actually swapping in and out. So maybe in like React or Angular, you might have I don't know, to-do list, and then you add another to-do, and it looks like you click add or edit, and it goes to a new screen, when in fact, your list of elements may be hiding, but then they show like an edit component. So things are constantly swapping in and out, right? And it comes down to modifying this document object model, the branches of the tree. We can also attach listeners to events. Very cool stuff. Probably more fun than finding elements or traversing when you actually can add events. It's pretty cool. Because then we get to that Friday, I think. Initially, I was going to spend half day on Thursday doing that, but I think that needs its whole lecture, its whole night, just to kind of get used to events and how to apply them. Because then interfaces become fun. They're not just static pages, right? Like in Full Stack 1, we had a static page. We just had to worry about the presentation. For your project, your first assignment was a static page, but after we learn this week, we will be able to see how we can make that the music search come to life somehow. Because then we can start to trigger stuff. As in, if we were to, click a search button, we may be able to trigger something, right? Maybe we might be able to ideally filter that list, that table that you guys created, hard-coded table of albums. Maybe we have a dynamic thing filtering in and out based on, our filter, something like that. But we need to learn all this stuff first before we can even get there, so you can understand what that might mean. So the interface itself, so we need to think of the document as a hierarchy of nodes. We already know it's a tree. We already know what the HTML tree looks like. We need to then look at this in our head as a hierarchy of nodes. So the DOM represents HTML or XML documents. So we remembered way back when we said, in our header, the type, in our doc type, the doc type can tell whether or not it's an HTML document or XML. Now, you may work with XML. XML is more server-side coding, or in some of the old school web services, their payloads are actually XML. Like, if you ever heard of, yeah, you may not have heard about it, but SOAP protocol actually used like kind of a markup like XML, kind of a heavy payload, tags. It's similar to HTML, pretty heavy, not lightweight. So consider the following document. You can tell here with our nice indentation that we have a little bit of a nested kind of thing going on here, which yeah, it would probably look similar to this right here. Sorry, jumping around like that tree. Right, so we could look at it in this way. The following represents that code. We have the document, the document. Inside of the document, we have the HTML, and then we have two branches. We have the head, the tag, and then we have some type of text. We also have a body, we have a paragraph, and we have text. Similar to this, right? So if you notice, we have this content here, this inner text. We have this content here, JavaScript DOM. When we go down this route, this branch here, it will have text and it'll have, so this is a little bit weird example here because you might think that JavaScript DOM means something, but really that's just the text of it, like a text string. Whereas if we come down the path of the body with the paragraph and the text, we have just hello DOM down there. So only two branches. And it would be nice if you actually had something like this. You could visualize your HTML in a nice way like this. So we kind of looked at this. We might have saw this before in the window, because remember, when you are in the document, you are in a container of the window. So you're in the content of the window. So if you access the document from window.document, that would be the explicit path. But you can actually just refer to the document, which has an interface to represent every web page loaded in the browser, serves as the entry point into the web page content, which is a DOM tree, right? So we have a wrapper around all these elements. This interface describes those common properties for any kind of document, depending on its type. So this is when we got into the doc type. So we're going to deal with XML. Sorry, my mistake, HTML. But there are these other types here, XML and SVG, and the API changes based on the type. So one of the things you might have asked before is, why do we need to put that doc type on the top? Because the browser needs to know which type of document and API it's loading up and the features it needs to kind of get ready for you to use, right? So HTML documents served with that text HTML content type. So then it will implement that HTML document interface so that the browser knows which interface to implement. Whereas those XML, SVG documents, they have this other XML document interface. So, you know, key point to look at there. And what that means is, again, when you go back to the docs, as always, when we look at this piece here, you're going to see on here a whole bunch of other pieces here. Now there's a lot. There's a ton on this, and you'll see extensions for HTML document. So on this extension, some things interesting, like for web browsers, like HTML5, cookies, right? Cookie is something that is for the browser. Then you have like location and those kind of things. When you get into, let's see, XML, SVG. So there's certain things that are only for, let's see here, implement the XML, sorry, I was looking at the wrong one. Implement the XML document interface. So when you get into this interface, then you're dealing with a lot of other things you're not going to be necessarily working with, right? Or totally different API. Some may be similar, but some may not be. And it's just it's a different beast in itself, right? And if you look already, look at all this right here. There's a lot of stuff that's just not handled for web. That's not meant for web, right? I mean, there's just a lot of compatibility issues, right? So I mean, we're not gearing for the web here. So that's XML document. So if you ever wondered what the doc type was, if we scroll down to that interface, there's a lot of specification on a lot of stuff, you know. But again, look at how many there are. Each one of those properties will have a grid here, and you need to find out, you know, if it's deprecated or not, what version of browsers, you know, like this is a common thing for legacy code, right? So again, that's why we use our doc type. Way back in Full Stack 1, where we're wondering about that text HTML at the top of our document, that's why. Right, so let's take a look at the DOM. Let me know if you can't hear this, by the way.
Can't hear you.
All right, somebody can't hear. Thank you. Thank you for telling me. All right, cool. Yeah, I didn't forget. I forgot to share my screen with that. 1 second here. I don't know why there's no default here. Include computer sound. There we go. Kudos to whoever said that. Thank you.
Programming interface. But what that really means is that we can use the DOM when we interact with web pages. And when I say interact, I mean we can add content to a HTML document, we can remove content from a HTML document, and we can change content on a HTML document. All of that interactivity we can do via the DOM, and we can do this on the fly as your web page is being loaded or viewed in a web browser. So working through the DOM one component at a time, first of all, we've got the document, right? And the document is just the web page. Now, it doesn't matter whether you view that web page in a browser like this on the left or in your text editor on the right. We'll see two different things. It's the same thing. It's just the document. And typically speaking, when we do web design and web development, that document is a HTML document. So when we say the document in regards to the DOM, we generally mean the HTML document. The next component is the object. Now, In HTML, pretty much every element within your document is an object. That means the head tag is an object, the body tag is an object, the UL tag is an object, the P tag is an object, A tags, span tags, div tags. Any tag in your HTML document is an object in the eyes of the DOM. And we know by now that JavaScript works very well with objects. We can call methods on objects. We can call properties on objects. So we can use those objects in HTML, all those tags, to call methods on them, to change them, delete them, add to them, etc. And finally, we come to the last component, which is the model. Now, the model basically describes how these objects are laid out in a tree fashion, much like this diagram. We've got the HTML at the top. Underneath that, we have head tags, title tags, body tags, UL tags, div, blah, 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 blah. It's all displayed in some kind of hierarchical tree. So that is one aspect of the model. It describes how those objects are laid out. But we can take it one step further and we can introduce nodes. And yep, nodes are pretty much anything we can change in a HTML document. So yes, these are all nodes, these objects or these elements, they're all nodes within the DOM, and we can grab each one of these nodes and change it. But also, the text within these elements are also nodes. So the li tag is a node, but the text within that li tag is also a separate node, right? And we can grab hold of that separately and change it. And finally, HTML attributes are also nodes. So we may have a href attribute on a particular tag, or a class attribute, or a styles attribute. And we can grab hold of all of those individually as well. They are nodes. So what can we do with the DOM? Well, we can change these nodes. We can interact with them, right? And a few examples are here. We could change the text node within a h1 tag, right? We could change the background color of an element node. We could animate the logo node from the left to the right. So that's node, right? We just animate that from the left side of the document to the right side of the document. We could expand the height of an element node when you click on it. For example, you might have a bit of text, then a read more link below. If you click that link, it expands the height of that element node so you can read more. Plus, we can do tons of other things with the DOM as well. Animations, validations, tons of other cool stuff. And we're going to go into a bit of that later on. So that pretty much sums up what the DOM is. If you have any questions, feel free to ask down below. I'll answer any questions.
Right. So it's good to visualize it as a nodes, that objects nodes. But before we can do some of that really nice stuff, we need to know how to find these elements, which are select them. Right. We need to know how to select them, because when we can grab onto them, then we can manipulate them, and so we need to know how to select them first of all. We also need to know how to traverse them, which on Thursday we'll learn how to traverse some of these things. Again, traversing means, if you want to traverse your way down a branch and back up, you may need to do that just to find, all of the children nodes or something like that. You may need to, if you needed to change something, styles on days of a calendar or something like that, right? You may have a calendar that has a month that has days. You may need to change all the days, or all the months in a year, those kind of things. But we need to know how to define them. So these will sound very similar to CSS. I mean, they're probably most likely based on these kind of selectors, or CSS is based on these selectors. Probably that's, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure, to be honest. I would think they would be based on the CSS selectors, because HTML and CSS probably in place first. Now, who knows? Because selectors, they've only gotten really good in both. Yeah, I'd have to look that up to be honest, which one came first. But anyhow, same idea. So just like CSS, you have a selector that grabs by ID. So if you have but it returns. Now you got to remember with these selectors, you have to key into them. Some of these return multiple elements, and some return single. So obviously we established with an ID. An ID is a unique identifier. So therefore, just as in CSS, when you would do that hashtag ID, we have something as well here. So document, remember window.document, we're accessing the API. It has a get element by ID. and the ID happens to be header dash title. So here we get the element with the ID of header dash title, and we save it into a variable. So in this situation, when we get that title, now we have that object. We could do something with that if we wanted to, and we will. So that get element by ID returns a DOM element specified by that ID. Otherwise, if it can't find the matching element, it will return null. Just to say no element is found. It won't throw an error. It won't do anything. Just like CSS, it will just return a null value because nothing is selected. In the case that, which is bad, but it's certainly possible in an HTML document, you may have elements have the same ID. Then the get element by ID just returns the first one that it finds. Yeah, so I mean that just returns the first one that it finds. So that makes sense, right? So you may have a situation where you have a very simple example here is you have a paragraph with the ID of message. Document contains the paragraph with that attribute, ID attribute, and then we use document.getElement by ID. If you notice, there's no hashtag. Normally in the CSS selectors, we needed a hashtag, but we don't need it here because it's using this function. So it's going to look for ID. It's going to internally look at all the IDs in your document and then match up, this string to that. And if you console log it, you'll see the output, and the output will look something similar to this, where you'll actually have a paragraph. Now, it may not appear like this. I'll show you what it may look like in the console, but the point is you'll be able to grab that element and you may be able to look at its attributes in your console window. So that's get element by ID. So then at the same time, same as CSS, if we have ID, we may need to select or find elements with the class name. So therefore we have a method in our interface that get elements by class name. So, but the key to this one is it returns an array of elements. So it's not a unique identifier. As we know, there may be many elephants. There may be many elements that we may need to style, like days in a month of a calendar. We may need to color all the days a certain color, so there will be multiple days with that style, that class. We need to select them all. So in this example here, we have a class with list items, and we need to save all of those in a variable, which will return an array. So we have a list of them, which we already know what array is. It's a storage list, storage mechanism for multiple elements. So we'll have an array to work with. So it just accepts the name, which is the name attribute of the element, the class, and then of course, if something changes in your DOM, it'll pick it up. So if you happen to insert something with that class, or something may change in the DOM the next time you do the get elements by class name, it'll be different. It'll be increased or decreased depending on what happened in the page, but it'll definitely pick it up. So every element may have a name. So you may have the situation here. So we know what class is pretty straightforward, but we have this situation as well, where you may have, and this is a classic situation, is the name attribute for forms, right? You may get the situation for, now you may not have dealt with these before, but the radio buttons, you may have, we may have dealt with it at some point, but radio buttons share the same name because they need to be part of a collection. So there may be a case where they may have their own unique identifiers, but they share the same name because they're part of a group. They're part of a group of, in this thing, it would be technology, JavaScript and TypeScript. So to get all the elements with the same name, you use a different kind of selector. You use get elements by name in the same way, and that'll go through and scan your DOM for the name attribute with the name that you give it, which in this case would be language here. So it's scanning this part here. That's one case, actually. Somebody might have asked, why would we ever use name aside from forms, to keep collections like radio buttons together? This is a very common thing you'll get to, and there's a whole bunch of common bugs around around that kind of situation. All right, so we also, hold on here for a second here. Let me look back at, so this code piece here, right? So here we have this block where we're just gonna do what we said here. We're gonna grab an element by ID message and just console log it. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So if we have this DOM element here, let's take a look here at this. My browser, it loads up somewhere. Where is it here? It's right here. All right, so there's our paragraph there. And if we take a look at our console, we have that. We have message. It just really nice. It's just the element itself. And that's by ID. So it's giving us this entire element here. That's cool. All right, so that's pretty straightforward. There's just one of them. So if we had a situation where we had two paragraphs with the same ID, right? It's not going to return two of them. I believe it returns the first one, which will be, let's close this here, sorry. So it should return the paragraph, I would suspect. So it returned that one there. If we had this one on the top, it should return that as well. The first one that it finds, I guess, top to bottom. So it returns that one there because that one's on the top in our DOM tree, right? It's right there. Now again, you may have wondered in the past, why would I ever put my script inside the body? It's because if we put this at the top and we try to put this inside the header tag, so remember the header tag is before the browser renders, and you need to, your resources all and your scripts will run. At this point in time, the document body has not been loaded yet. So we may not be able to get access to, and maybe in some of your examples, you may notice this, right, in your lab. So now it's null because at that time, the browser hasn't loaded yet. This is the header tag. So in this header tag, when it goes to grab something from the document, it's not going to throw an error yet. But basically, these nodes has not been rendered yet. So there's a concept of page lifecycle that we haven't gone through, but there's a concept of rendering and there's a concept of loaded. So either way, this hasn't happened yet. This hasn't been rendered, nor has the page finished loading by the time this script tag has executed. It executes all this first, and then it hits the body tag, right? So for us, whether we put it inside of the body tag or we put it outside completely, whether we put it right here after the body script, it doesn't really matter because at that point in time, by the time it executes, it will have everything it needs to find it. And you could also probably put it outside of the whole. Let's try it. We could probably put it outside of the whole HTML itself. It should be the same. Yes, the same. So it's kind of the sequence of events, and that's why you may not want to put it in the header tag. And for some of this examples, if you put your script tag, just remember if you can't find things, it's because this section has not loaded yet. But also you got to remember is that because we're running it on load, because we're doing our mechanisms where we might have like a we might have a function here, find message, right? We might have a function expression. We may wrap it in this way, and we have to do this invocation on the fly. So when the page loads, it needs to invocate. So we're fighting timing. We're fighting the life cycle of the page, right? Like we have to invoke it because our only way of invoking it is when the browser loads. But when we learn events, we can trigger this off some event. By that time, the page is already loaded. By that time, the DOM is already represented. Then we're triggering it off of a user action, a user click, a user select, hover, these kind of things. In order for those users to trigger those actions, the page has to be loaded. And at that point in time, you don't need this there anymore. You could put it in the header tag only to be called. You don't need to invocate off of a user action, right? So when we get into events, this will all make more sense. But because we're relying on the on the loading of the browser, we need to do it in this way. So sometimes in your examples, if you move a lot of this code to like an external file, you may get a bunch of undefineds and null when you go to run it. So that's that. So by name, so here's a situation here where you may have a bunch of radio button boxes here, radio buttons, a collection here. So you may have a bunch of these, and they may all have the same name, right? And in order to select them all, you would need a different selector that returns an array. So we may have a button that has an ID, which we can use that previous selector, get document.getElementById. by ID. However, we want to capture these entire lists of radio boxes. So we would have to use that other selector. So that would be a very good case where you would need that, because if you see here, we have the ID button, which is pretty straightforward here. We just use the get element by ID, and we give it the name of the ID. So that finds the button, and then we output it here. It doesn't really matter the sequence, right? We could put this console log, we could put it here, and then we go after the rates, which are the radio button boxes. Radio buttons. So that's going to, by name, it's going to look at all of these, and anything it selects there, it's going to grab the whole group. And then when we console log it, it's going to return it in an array, but it could be a list as well, right? A node list. Either way, it's a collection. So if you see that there now, we have all those radio button. If we hover over it, you can see that, you know, we can actually look at them a little bit. So if we expand it, we're going to probably find a lot of, we're going to see all the attributes attached to it. Now you notice everything's null because we haven't populated anything really. The only thing we may have populated here is we populated the default value, which is very good. Very good. So it's this one here, right? We have a bunch of other stuff in there, but we haven't, you know, if you scroll down, we haven't populated it. So we've selected them all, but eventually when we learn how to manipulate the DOM, so watch this, I can change this node. I think can I change this? No, it's not letting me change it. But when we modify, we would be able to change it on the fly. So when we do our modifications, we would actually be able to change this very good on the fly without actually having to reload the page. At the same time, you can actually dig into, if you wanted to iterate over all of them, like let's see here, what do we call this value here? We called it rates. So if I output, let's see if I can output rates. There you go. So if I wanted to get access to the fourth element, which is the last one, we could just grab the last element there, which returns, see now that I'm digging into that collection, that array, even though it's represented as a node list, we're still using what we learned in arrays in the last class, where we can access by an index each element of that array. If we wanted to get the value of it, right? Now we can dig into the value. If we wanted to look at the attribute of the name, we could find that it's rate. Let's see if we can change the value. If we wanted to manipulate something to, I don't know, let me modify this because the page is finished loading. But when you actually get into so we've changed that value of the array, which is a reference, right? So if we look at the value of this, so that's actually XXX. But this is a reference to this. We haven't actually modified this because we're dealing with the collection that we're basically dealing with a copy of it, and we're not modifying this true. But when you get good at it, you will be able to modify everything by, you know, clicking a button would change all of these, or hovering over it, you can hover the color. So when we learn how to manipulate these things, we will be able to do that kind of interactive changes on the fly. But anyhow, as for getting it, that's what it is. So we need to use this get by elements ID, and then we can dig into each one of them. I think we actually looked at, okay, so that was that one. Let's see the other selector we talked about, right? So you can actually get elements also by tag name. So if you remember with CSS, you know, we had we had many times where we needed to grab all the paragraphs or all the span tags and change the background color. You can certainly do the same thing in JavaScript, but you could also grab all the elements by tag name. So here we would be getting all of the LIs, which would be the list items in an unordered list in this way on the screen. So this method, again, it's specification of the DOM element, right? It accepts a tag name. So you can return a live HTML collection of elements with the matching tag name in order of which they appear in the document. Right, so the tag name represents any tag in the HTML. So if we wanted to, in this example here, grab all of the header H2 tags. So we can grab all the H2 tags here, and then we can do something with them, right? So we could, for our purposes right here, we're just actually outputting them to the console. But let's take a look at them. So we have all these different elements in our tree. And right now we are just, let me put this to the side here so you can see it a little bit better here. So we have 3 H1 tags, sorry, H2 tags. So we have this one here, we have that one there, and we have that one there. So it's nice that we can hover over these and see which one we have. If we expand it again, I'm sure we could, we could actually, what were they called? Headings? Okay, headings. And if we wanted to access this, the first one, or yeah, the first one, and we wanted to get the text, I believe, the text content. So this attribute is called text content. If we look at the header, that is actually the tag plus the text content, if you remember your HTML. So we could actually do a whole bunch of things. We could iterate over all of our collections and change the text content. We could just go and output them and whatnot. We can use a mix of selectors, like right here we have, just get element by, we could copy all this here. And suppose we wanted to, at the same time, we wanted to output all the paragraphs, right? So at the same time, we would just do the same thing, right? Paragraphs for paragraph. And then what else do we see in there? We see a button with an ID in there. We could actually grab that button as well, right? We could just say button document. We could remember that it's window.document if we want it to be explicit. .get element by using the IntelliSense. We have a bunch of access to a bunch of stuff. Some things we don't know. We could actually grab the button, what was it, button count. And then we can output that, console log.button. Again, if I miss my semicolon, it's not going to bark at me. And if I go, because I don't have any events, I can trigger my own event, which is a reload. And as you can see here, we have a collection, which is like an array. We have 3 H2s, header 2s, 3 paragraphs. We actually get that one element, which is a button. It gives it to us straight away. So that's a mix of by tag name. And that should be familiar with what we learned. At the same, not to be outdone, I guess, we can also select by class name. Again, so same deal as CSS. We may need classes on our buttons for primary or just button, and we may need to select all of the buttons, right? We could certainly select all of the elements that have buttons, but there may be some buttons that are blue out of all the mix, right? There may be like a cancel, which is grayed out, but all the blue buttons are, the OK buttons are saved. So maybe we need to grab all the primary buttons here. In this case, I'm looking at button space button / primary, and in my head I know that is relating to Bootstrap. Bootstrap has those styles. So a primary button would be blue with white text. So maybe I want to grab all the primary buttons and I want to do something with them, right? I don't want to grab all the buttons. I just want to filter or take a select subset of the buttons. So then I can select it by class. Some of you might not know or might know about jQuery. Someone might say, well, why don't you use just jQuery, right? And that's a fair question, because I'm very good at jQuery and I used to rely on it heavily. But you can do all this stuff with vanilla JavaScript as well. jQuery is a library, another library. and some depends on the structure of the team. Some people don't. Some companies, as I said before, don't like third-party libraries. jQuery has been around for a long time, but also it was written at a time when you know, it could have been written in a time precursor to ES6. So, you know, JavaScript's caught up a lot to it, and all these features. Sometimes the ECMA will look at what's out there and just be like, well, let's just build it ourselves. So we don't need to, people don't need to have to get external libraries. So you can do it all with this as well, right? So, but again, if you've heard of jQuery, they are very big on selectors, and again, similar to all this stuff. So you may need to grab all the class names, and this is how you do it. Get elements by class name. If you match elements by multiple classes, oh yeah, right. So you can use the white space separator. So if you see there on the bottom there, if you need to get multiple classes, just like how you apply multiple CSS classes, you just use that space. So you can match up button, but button primary, if you notice there's a spelling mistake, then if that was a spelling mistake, it would not work. It would still select all the buttons, but you'd miss all the primary ones. Right, so I'm going to get into DOM traversal in a second, but I wanted to, I wanted to go back to this class here. Sorry, this class, this example. Get elements by class. Right, so we may have this situation here. Let's just see it for a second here. Let's see what it looks like. All right, so we have this markup here. We have a div tag which has an ID, and we have a navigation bar. So I guess I don't have my styles, but you could pretend that it was a navigation menu. And suppose we wanted to go and get we wanted to get the menu item, which is right here. We didn't actually, okay, let's console log it. Console log.menu to get that element by ID. And then we wanted to get all the items there by class. See, so you have all the items that have a class, the LIs with class items. So if we refresh this, so it actually didn't find that for some reason. But anyhow, that's probably something I did. Oh, see, I'm thinking of CSS. I have a pound sign there. See, that's a common mistake. In my head, I was thinking a CSS selector. We don't need that right there. That'll prevent you from selecting that main menu ID by ID. So there it is right there, and we can look at it. We can see everything. But if you notice here, we got a collection of 4, and we have 4 items, right? So that would be no different than in this scenario. It really would be no different than using what is it? Use it get element by tag name. So really, this would be no different than getting all of the LIs, right? Because it's the same. We're selecting all 4. So really, there was no need for that one. However, what happens if we wanted to get this one highlighted element? Now, it may not look any different right now, but somebody might have thrown a class on it just for this scenario, where I need to grab the third element and do something special with it. But I need to be able to select it out of that mix, right? So that doesn't make sense to grab it by tag name or to grab it by item name. You know, we could probably most certainly directly get it in this fashion, highlight, because now it'll only look for the class that has highlight. My spelling is usually off. I'm not an author, just an author of code. Take a look at that right here. So if I refresh it, I'm expecting 1. So I got one collection. Great. So that's what I wanted. I could probably do this as well. I could probably go item. Sorry. I could probably also search by both classes, right? Get me the items that have, get me the list items that have a class of item, but also have a class of highlight, right? So I could also do that as well. That returns 1, because you may have, okay, so you might have highlight, but you might have disabled, right? So now it gives us some flexibility, right? We have two, but now I really want that disabled one, right? So either I can directly search for the one that is disabled, but so this is where it gets really weird. This is where it gets strange. Like you could have a button in there. You could have a button that's a submit button that is also has a class of, and I only want to apply my style to this item here. I don't want to select the button that is also disabled. So I need to be very specific in what I need to select. That's why you might want to, stack your classes. Maybe you don't need highlight, or maybe you're very specific. Because if I search for just disabled, right, I'm going to get a mix of items, of elements here. So now I'm going to get that HTML collection. And inside of the collection, there is one button and one list item, which I don't want. I just want this one here. So therefore, I just have to mix and match how I'm selecting, whether or not I pick an item that's disabled, right, to get that one, or I'm more specific and I do the whole thing. However you do it, you just have to make sure that, when you're debugging, you're not selecting multiple things within the DOM, that you're selecting exactly what you want. So in this case, I want the list item that's highlighted but also disabled, which is a strained mix, but that's how I'm going to narrow it down to that one there, right there, right. So that's a lot to take in, but that is get by class name. So yes, traversing the tree. So let's look at this to break it up. Let's see how far we get here. Right.
Yo, what's going on, guys? You're watching JavaScript for Beginners at lesson 33, and in this video we're going to start traversing the DOM. Woohoo! Alright then, guys, so in the last video I showed you what the document object model was, and we came across a diagram like this on the left, which is just a visual representation of those objects in your document in some kind of tree format. Alright, that is how the DOM is represented. Now, what we can do in JavaScript is reach into this structure and grab any node that we want to, and then change it or add to it or whatever we want to do to it in JavaScript. So we could reach in if we wanted to and grab this and then say, hey, we want to change this, we want to do something to it, and we'd write a JavaScript kind of script that would do that. Or we could reach in, grab the body, and then say, hey, within this body node, I want to find every H1 node. Go and get me those. So we can do that also. We can traverse this DOM structure and find any node that we want to, and then change it or do whatever we want to do with it in the JavaScript. So that is exactly what we're going to do now. We're going to look at how we reach in and grab these nodes. Alright then, class. So I'm going to show you 3 JavaScript methods by which we can go in and grab nodes or content and store them in variables. Okay, so the first one I want to show you is the get elements by class name. So we do that by calling the method first of all on the document object, because the document is like the root object. It's like the mother of all objects, the highest in the kind of hierarchical tree, right? So we know all elements and all classes are in the document, so we'll specify document.get elements by class name. So remember, that's how we write methods. We do a dot right there after the object, and then we call the method name, right? So we know to call methods, we need the parenthesis, and then this, my friends, won't be enough. We need to specify which class we want to grab, and we do that within the parenthesis. We pass in that parameter right there within quotations. So let's have a look on our web page. We'll right click this title and see, there we go, we'll get the content class right there, the div with a class of content. So let's go back to the console and pass in content as the class name. So we're saying, hey, in the document dot go and get every element by class name, and the class name is content, right? So let's press enter, and it's returned to us now. We can see it's an array because of these square brackets, and it's returned to us 4 different elements, and all these elements have a class of content. And if I hover over this top one, we can see on the left that div right there, the second one is right there, the third one's too far down to see, but if we hover over now, we can see it, and the fourth one will be right at the bottom there. Okay, so now we can't do anything to this directly now because we've not stored this in a variable. We've just called the method right there. If we want to do something to this, we have to store it in a variable first of all, and we know how to do that. We just write var, we'll say my content divs equals, and we'll do exactly the same. We'll copy this. Oops, copy, paste it over there, and then we're storing this array in my content div. So if I call that now, my content divs, then we get that array. So now we can call properties or methods in this on this object, on this variable here that we've created. And one of those would be another way to get content, and that's the get elements by tag name. So let's take a look at this second one right here. We know that this content div contains this title. So let's have a look at this title again. So that's a H2. So why don't we say within this content element, we want to grab the H2 element, right? Well, we can do that. So we've got my content divs. And remember, we use the square bracket notation to specify which one of these we want because it's an array. And we want this one right here. So that's 1 because it starts at 0, 1, 2, 3. So we want this one because that's where the title is. And then within that, we want to say get elements by tag name. And then the tag name is H2 because this is a H2. That's what we want, right? And we're going to store that also in a variable. We'll say var my H2 equals that. All right, let's press enter. And if we call my H2 now, we can see it's brought back again in an array this H2. Even though there's only one element here, it's still expecting that there may be more because we're saying get elements by tag name. So if there were 2 H2s within that content div, it would bring them back in this array. All right. So now we could change the content in that H2 tag if we want. We'd say my H2, and then it's in an array still, so we still have to say 0, the 0th position. And then we could call a method on this. We could say something like inner HTML, and don't worry too much about this method yet. I'm going to show you this later on, and we'll change that. We'll say yo ninjas. All right. And we'll press enter, and then if you look over here, it's changed that content. Pretty cool, yeah? So what we've done is we've gone into the JavaScript DOM, and we've grabbed which element we want, and we've changed the content. And we've done that via these two methods right here. Get elements by class name, which returns all the nodes in an array, and then get elements by tag name, which returns all nodes in an array also. Now, there was a quicker way to get this H2. If we look here, this H2 has an ID, and we can get elements by ID as well. So the way we do that is by saying document.get elements by, there we go, get element by ID. And then the ID that we pass it through is page title, because that's that ID right there. So if we call that, we can see now it's going to bring back that H2 exactly the same as here. But notice this, it's not in an array. Now, why is that? That's because JavaScript knows there should only be one ID on each document. They're unique. So it's not expecting anymore. If you look here, it says get element by ID, not elements like here. That is the difference. Wherever it says get elements, it's going to bring back an array like this. Where it says elements, it's going to bring back just one, so we don't need it in an array. All right then, guys, so that is how we reach in and grab content. In the next video, what we're going to do is start getting this content.
All right, so what you notice there is he did something called chaining. So you can see, because it returns a node list, you can drill into those nodes, right? By using get element by ID, get element by tag name, you could keep chaining those results and using that API to drill down. Don't think that, you know, we're just working on this level, right? So you could actually drill into this and then access more of those if you wanted to, using those drilling. So just keep that in mind. So you know what, I want to give you, that's going to take about 15 minutes. So I want to give people the time to to continue to get some help in the lab. So let's we only got an hour left. So let's take until like say 9:30 to get some help in those rooms, and then we'll come back, finish this lecture. If we have time, go over some of the lab, and then do the quiz. So let's do that, and we'll be back at 9:30 to finish that off, and we'll see you in a bit. All right.